This is a presentation I put together for critical thinking class in my undergrad on the subject of should same-sex marriage be legal? The subject of same-sex marriage has been a hot topic of political and civil rights debates in America for decades. Many emotional arguments have been made from both sides of the issue, from the condemnation of homosexuality as sin and unnatural to the mantra, love has no labels. In this presentation, I'm not going to ask you to open your hearts, but rather I want us to open our minds and approach this subject from a critical, logical point of view. And by the end of this presentation, I hope to demonstrate to you that a same-sex relationship no more meets the criteria of being a marriage than a three-sided shape meets the criteria of being a square. In dealing with the issue of same-sex marriage, we must first ask ourselves, what is marriage? Marriage is as ancient as civilization. Historical writings confirm that throughout time, marriage has been regarded as the legal sexual union of a man and woman with the intent of reproduction. Historians note that among the ancient civilizations of the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, marriage was fundamentally a business arrangement between a man and woman whose prime intent in the eyes of the state was not companionship, but procreation. Likewise, in Middle Eastern cultures, marriage was regarded as the union of a man and wife to become one flesh, which was understood as a term that referred to conception. Through reproduction, the man and woman's flesh became one in the womb of the wife. In ancient Roman culture, marriage was understood as the union of a man and woman and wasn't regarded as fully consummated until the birth of their first child. In fact, the word matrimony from the Latin literally means mother's obligation, which implies the understood intent of marriage as reproduction. After studying the practices of ancient civilizations and surveying through the timeline of human history, renowned philosopher and sociologist Edward Westermark, who, by the way, was not a Christian, he was actually an adversary to religion, in his book, The History of Human Marriage, Edward Westermark concluded that from a scientific point of view, there is but one definition of marriage, which is the durable connection between male and female lasting beyond the mere act of propagation till the birth of the offspring. Westermark went on to say that this definition of marriage excludes all loose connections by which usage are never honored by the name marriage. So according to Westermark, this one definition of marriage not only tells us what marriage is, but it excludes what marriage is not. In September of 1996, United States President Bill Clinton signed the Defense of Marriage Act, which legally defined marriage as the union between one man and one woman. This federal law also identified the term spouse to refer only to a person of the opposite sex who is a husband or wife. The 2013 Supreme Court decision, United States versus Windsor, has rendered this law unenforceable. However, many legislatures question the validity of the Supreme Court's 5-4 decision. Arkansas Senator Jason Rapert has recently introduced a resolution to change the United States Constitution to define marriage as the union of one man and one woman. So for at least 4,000 years of human history, marriage has been understood as the legal union of a man and woman with the intent to reproduce. Based upon this understanding of the word marriage, same-sex relationships simply do not meet the criteria of being a marriage. To illustrate this point another way, the circle on the screen is green. Green is understood as the union of blue and yellow. It doesn't matter how dark the shade of blue or how pale the shade of yellow. Any union of blue and yellow equals green. Likewise, green is the union of one blue and one yellow. All it takes is one blue and one yellow to equal green. You cannot unite two blues and call that relationship green. Likewise, you cannot unite two yellows and call that relationship green. The only relationship that meets the definition and criteria of green are blue plus yellow. If you apply this same common logic to marriage, then it is easy to understand that a marriage is the legal union of a man and a woman. A common objection to this reasoning, that if a marriage is defined as the legal sexual union of a man and woman with the intent of reproduction, then what about couples who can't reproduce? This question actually strengthens the traditional meaning of marriage because couples do not typically discover that they are infertile until after they have attempted to reproduce. Thus, the man and woman's intent in marriage was reproduction. Some may question why the government is involved in the issue of marriage in the first place, and this again goes back to the intent of marriage. The government encourages marriage through tax breaks and other benefits. The logic behind this is that men and women who marry are likely to reproduce, which helps ensure the continuation of society through reproduction. Thus, marriage is the legal union of a man and woman with the intent of reproduction. A fallacy in the debate on same-sex marriage is the idea that same-sex marriages would help alleviate the overall expense of adoption and the foster care system upon the American taxpayers. First of all, this argument assumes that most same-sex marriages would result with those couples adopting children, which simply cannot be determined. Secondly, this argument proves that the intent of marriage is in fact to produce children. Otherwise, why would same-sex couples seek to adopt? This then solidifies the argument that a marriage is the union of a man and woman for the intent of reproduction. The truth of the matter is that same-sex marriage is not needed for these couples to adopt. This is a fact that is not widely publicized by the LGBT community. Since 2010, every state in the United States has allowed unmarried men or women to adopt. Single adults are also allowed to adopt children from foreign countries from around the world. In the United States, marital status, age, income, and/or sexual orientation are not particular qualifications when it comes to foster care or adoption. Likewise, many states already have domestic relation laws which govern property rights, medical rights, and retirement for couples, both homosexual or heterosexual, who choose to live outside of the legal definition of marriage. What seems to me to be the greatest hypocrisy of the LGBT community concerning adoption is that gay couples can only adopt children who were born of some sort of heterosexual relationship, which again confirms the time-tested definition of marriage as a legal union between a man and a woman with the intent of reproduction. Homosexual relationships are actually dependent upon heterosexual reproduction, which is the only form of human reproduction. The LGBT community likewise likes to play both sides of the fence by arguing adoption as a valid reason for the legalization of same-sex marriage, yet they are very vocal in their support of a woman's right for abortion. These two positions are at opposite ends of the spectrum from one another. The most prominent argument among same-sex marriage proponents is that not recognizing same-sex relationships as marriage is a violation of the 14th Amendment of Equal Rights. Love Has No Labels is a popular ad campaign used to promote the agenda for same-sex marriage. The video depicts people viewed through an X-ray as skeletons. Among those who emerge from behind the screen are a lesbian couple, an interracial heterosexual couple, a child with Down syndrome, people of various religions, and a homosexual couple. The X-ray is used to illustrate that love has no labels. However, there are several apparent fallacies with this illustration. First of all, the ad is guilty of a faulty analogy by comparing sexual orientation with race, religion, or disabilities. Second is the fallacy of begging the question by assuming that labels result in bias. Also, the ad is deceiving by omitting information. Viewers observe two skeletons embraced in a kiss. Is love labeled as two people? Why not three skeletons embraced in a kiss? Or suppose that when you see the two skeletons behind the screen kissing, that one of those skeletons that appears out from one side is a 60-year-old man, and the other skeleton that appears from the other side is a 13-year-old girl. Does love have labels now? What if the two skeletons kiss behind the screen and out of one side appears a very attractive young man, and then out of the other side appears his identically attractive twin? Does love have a label now? There are various government criteria regarding marriage. Even the Supreme Court ruling still limits marriage as between two people. That's a label. Other criteria include age, or the fact that couples cannot be parent, offspring, siblings, or in some cases, close relation. Yet same-sex proponents don't argue that any of these are a violation of the 14th Amendment. Equal rights does not necessitate identical rights, especially when some certain criteria must be met. Love has no labels is a red herring that blurs the issue of the legality of same-sex marriage, because marriage in and of itself is a label. If love has no labels, then why all the fuss to label your relationship as a marriage? If the issue is in fact property rights, inheritance taxes, or medical benefits, then the laws dealing with these issues should either be revised or revoked, not reinvent the wheel or change the definition of marriage. But if the issue is that same-sex couples want their lifestyles to be not simply tolerated, but accepted as normal, then that is a totally different issue that has nothing to do with equal rights. What is apparent is the Supreme Court's decision has resulted in an utter failure to balance the rights of same-sex couples with the First Amendment rights of those whose religious convictions object to same-sex relationships. In the 1967 case, Loving versus Virginia, the Supreme Court, citing a previous ruling, defined marriage as one of the basic civil rights of man, fundamental to our very existence and survival. Yet marriage can only be fundamental to our existence when it is recognized as the union through which reproduction occurs. Same-sex marriages are not fundamental to our existence because they cannot result in reproduction. There's no such thing as homosexual reproduction. So a same-sex relationship cannot be considered as meeting the criteria of a fundamental right of marriage. Therefore, the conclusion of the matter is this: marriage is the legal union between a man and a woman with the intent to reproduce. Same-sex relationships simply do not live up to this criteria and should not be regarded as a legal marriage.